lunchtime seminar with Uta. We'll start in a few, just 2 or 3 minutes, just waiting for people to arrive so that we don't end up just everyone arriving partway through. So just stay with it for a moment or two and then we'll get started in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so can you all see my slides, by the way, Jem, because you're saying?
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, hi, Uta.
Hi, Jem. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming, everyone. Tilly, hi. Just responding to people in the chat. I have the chat open, so if anyone wants to make a comment, you can just pop it in. Yeah.
Great.
So, Uta, just before we get started, just how long are you looking to talk for?
We'll start with a little opening reflection, and then I guess I want to speak less than the time that they said I should. So maybe, hopefully, like 20 minutes, maybe.
Okay. Well,
and then we can discuss and
25 minutes or so, and then open to questions. Yeah. And as people are now familiar within Teams, you can raise your hand so that when we come to questions, but we'll go through. So I think we're now looking at about, let's sort of make a start, I think, as people are coming in. So first of all, just welcome everyone to this lunchtime seminar, which Uta Tierman is doing for us. Many of you, if not most of you, will be very familiar with Uta, who's a final year PhD student. Uta is currently actually based in Boston at the moment, so she's teaming in, if you like, from 8 o'clock in the morning, so nice and early. Thanks, Uta, for doing this. And Uta's PhD, for which I'm her supervisor, is looking at the links between mindfulness and pro-environmental behaviour. Again, many of you will be aware that Uta is not just a PhD student, she's also a yoga teacher, and many of you will have perhaps joined in on her regular yoga sessions as well. So this Uta's reporting here on a particular aspect of one aspect of her PhD research in relation to some survey work, which she's going to describe to you. But as you can see, there is looking at whether meditators, in other words, people who do mindfulness meditation, do they care more for the planet? So, Uta, hand it over to you, and I'll shut my video off in the process.
Okay, thank you, Bill, for this lovely introduction, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm really excited to be able to join you online now because I'm physically in Boston. So actually, this lockdown has been good for my integration in the department. Yeah, so I would like to start straight away. And what we want to be doing today are basically 3 things. We want to start by reflecting on our own environmental behaviors, because we are all studying and working for the environment, dedicating our life to it. So I think it's interesting to find out a little bit about you and your motivations. Then I will present the theoretical framework that has been leading me in this work for the survey, which we recently published in Ecological Economics. So you don't need to read the full paper, you can just listen to 2 slides. And at the end, I will show the survey results, a few graphics, and then we can discuss. So to start, I would like to ask you to open another browser window or maybe your phone, and you type in, I think the more reliable way is to type in menti.com with a code otherwise you can try out this link. Yesterday it hasn't worked, so I don't know why, but so if you can all take 2 minutes to log on the Menti, that would be great. And I saw someone clicking on the little heart. So if you could also click on the little hearts, then I see if many people log on. That's great. Good. Yeah, awesome. And then I think, yeah, when we have the results coming in, I might share the screen even for you to see, yeah, the results. So, okay, when you're then all logged on the Mentimeter, then I would like to start this little reflection. And I cannot see anyone in the video. Most of you have the videos off, but I still invite you to also maybe close your eyes for this little reflection, because I would like to take you to a place in nature that you know very well. Maybe a place that you have been a lot in your childhood, or where you go frequently to relax. And just picture this place around you for a moment, taking a few deep breaths here. Really taking in the colors, the vibrance of the trees or the water or the grass, whatever it is that you see. And take a moment to note how you feel here in this environment. What emotions does it bring up for you? And then in this place, in your nature place, look around. And 10 meters ahead of you, you see a plastic bottle on the ground. How do you feel when you look at this bottle? Take another breath or two. And then you take the decision to walk ahead towards the bottle and to take the bottle from the ground and to put it in your backpack because you want to dispose it at home. And as you finish packing away your bottle, you put the backpack back on your shoulders and you take a deep breath. Again, taking in the pristine nature around you, maybe the birds or the wind in your ears. And then slowly open your eyes. So if you think about this, you reflect about this experience that we had imagined. And here in Mentimeter, you see a question. Why do you do things for the environment? Thinking about this moment when you went to take the bottle and you put it in your backpack and the emotions you felt around that. Could you tell me which emotion was the strongest for you when you were picking up the bottle? Okay. Thank you for voting. We have 17 votes. Can someone tell me if you're seeing the results on your screen?
I can't, Ute.
Not yet, no.
Okay. All right, so what I will do is to share my second screen so you will be able to see. So I suppose now you can see it. And we see that we have the largest amount of people saying that it's meaningful to them and that they care, increasing. So 10 say that it's meaningful to them. 0 say it gives them pleasure. And then it goes on, it's the right thing to do. 6 people, I feel guilty if I don't. 2 people, nobody does it for their money. And then 1 person said, I have no idea why I did it. So this here is a very, I kind of expected this because we are all very highly committed. Let me stop sharing the screen now. Okay, back. And now the slides are gone.
Just need to go to browse and restart.
Do it again.
Reload it, yeah. Browse and reload. It'll.
Where is browse?
You go to share.
Oh, to share again.
And then browse.
Oh, stop share here.
Yeah, good. That's right.
And then share.
Then go to share. And then browse.
Man. Yeah, this is not great. Sorry, guys.
So you should, when you go to share, you should then be able to see.
Look, I need to go in all my folders to get it there.
Yeah.
Okay, found it. Right. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the little time it took. So here, this table now, you can see those motivations in these 6 options that I gave you in the bottom part of the slide. And so what this is about is that the 3 left motivations are considered more internal, while the other 3 are seen more external. So many of you that have read about environmental behaviors might be familiar with this idea of extrinsic motivation to do things and intrinsic motivation to do things. The carrot and the stick approach would be a more extrinsic approach where a person is motivated by external factors like, for example, money, as here was one of the options to do things. And more intrinsic would be if we really do something because it makes us feel good or because we feel it's a moral a conviction to act like this. And so what you can see in the Mentimeter, what we saw in the results was that 6 people said it's the right thing to do, which would show a strong moral identification with this option. But even more people said that they cared and it was meaningful to them, which shows even a higher level of internalization. So you can see here, this is from the self-determination theory, who are a very detailed theory about motivation in humans in general. And the highest level of motivation is achieved when we have 3 fundamental needs that are covered, which is the need to be autonomous, the need to be competent, and then, so autonomous means to do things by your own will and your own internal conviction and belief. The competence means that you are feeling almost like efficacy, that you feel you are able to perform a certain behavior. And the third one is relationship. So feeling that your relational needs are also met. So this table, you can read more about this in that paper that is cited. And this just to put ahead that when I started my PhD on mindfulness, I chose this theory, self-determination theory, because I thought that mindfulness meditation would help people to achieve a more integrated motivation towards the environment. And this is one of the main hypotheses I was looking for in the later slides. So just keep that in mind. And then I want to show you the model that I published in this same paper. And what you see in gray, the boxes, is basically the mainstream perspective on environmental behaviors, where we have a combination of the theory of plant behaviors integrated with the value belief norm theory and others in that realm, like putting into habits as well. This comes from another paper who has done an analysis on that. And because, you know, many of you have said it is meaningful to you and you care about your performing your actions, I personally thought none of those really applies to me. Of course, I think personally that it is the right thing to do to pick up the bottle, but something else is driving me deep inside. So I went researching, and I found also with Anne's help, who is the advisor to my PhD, and she works a lot on connectedness with nature. So I dig deeper on that, and I came up with this green pathway that, based on our relational qualities with the environment and how close we feel, how connected we feel, how exposed we have been to nature in our past, we can actually build up a relationship with nature, and then our pathway through empathy and compassion can be switched on. It's like being a friend or a child or a parent or someone who is close to you being hurt, who falls down. You will not be thinking, oh, is it the right thing now to go and help? I think it is. I will morally decide I'm going there now to do it. It is more like you don't think about it. You just take what it takes, and go and help that person. So in that sense, my assumption then is, in this theoretical model, that when this relational pathway is stronger in our motivation for the environment and in our behaviors, then we also internalize the motivation more. Hence, coming back to our little poll at the beginning, the stronger we feel related to the environment, the more we would have this motivation that feels like it's something meaningful to us. Okay, so this just to set the scene. You are always welcome to ask a question if there's any understanding question. I also open the meeting chat if you want to type in something quick and I just address it. So then I will continue here. Exactly. So again, saying that when we practice mindfulness, then my assumption is that this pathway becomes stronger, activated, because mindfulness has one of the results that it improves pro-social connection or pro-social tendencies and skills, and it also makes people more aware of the environment and nature around them. Okay, so then within this theoretical framework, we can now look into my survey. The survey was done with over 300 people, but then the answers that were qualitatively good enough were 300. And we have a high share of women in this sample, and also a high share of people with a university degree. And you can also see the age range and religion. Yeah. So good. So we have this first picture here where we have calculated a indicator from people's answers about how often do they eat animal proteins. So I asked them, how often per week do you eat meat, fish, eggs, and milk? And with a database for UK food products, I could identify their carbon emissions, their land use, and their water use. And I show you here their carbon emissions. And depending on the respondents' experience with mindfulness practice, we have classified them into 3 groups. This group being non-practitioners, people who do not practice very frequently or who have practiced less than a year, and advanced practitioners who practice longer than a year and for at least 3 times a week. And the groups are approximately the same size. And so now you can see here a progressive reduction in CO2 emissions tied to their animal protein consumption. And this is a significant difference between the non-practitioners and the practitioners, but not between the 2 practitioner groups. So it looks like those who practice a little bit of mindfulness already have a lower CO2 emission. So what I want to say ahead, and I will also say it again at the end, this is not a proof of causality, because obviously we did not do a long-term study. This is a one-time look. So we can just say the people who practice have a lower impact, but we cannot say the practice is what made them have a lower impact. But something about those people makes them have a significantly lower environmental impact from their animal protein consumption. And then I went ahead and calculated how much would this actually be over 1 year. We see those numbers in terms of kilograms of CO2, but they don't say much to us in many cases. So I took those environmental impacts over the time of a year, and I searched for examples from real life to get a feel for this. So the difference between non-meditators and advanced meditators in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions would be a saving of 1 return flight from London to Frankfurt. And the land occupation would be, for one person, a land as big to raise 4 chickens for a year, but not only some chicken, but organic chicken on a well-managed grass pasture. And in terms of water use, it's like saving 12 days of individual water, household water use per person, which is about a little more than 100 liters per day. So interestingly, just saying this is not on any slide, but in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions, I then took it one more step further to look at, okay, and how much would this be for a whole country if everybody saved 1 return flight per year? And we come to a greenhouse gas reduction of 3.8% of the national emissions. So that means, yeah, it does not seem significant when you look at the very little numbers, but if you extrapolate it to a whole nation, it would actually be as if the country reduces 3% of emissions just from animal protein consumption, not even the other things that we eat, fruits that are imported or things like that. Okay, then the next one goes now more into psychological factors. We asked them, these 3 groups, if they were trying to reduce the animal protein consumption. And in the non-meditator group, we have about 50-50 saying yes and no. And you see that with the mindfulness practice, more people said that they are actually trying to reduce their meat consumption. And this is separated for men and women, which I found was a very interesting finding, that women in general, independent of their mindfulness practice, seem to be motivated to reduce their consumption. And men, though, have a lot higher. They stated they reduce their meat consumption a lot more when they practice mindfulness. So I thought that was a kind of remarkable finding. And then once they say, yes, I try to reduce my meat consumption, we also asked them for the reasons why they reduce their meat consumption. And they were asked to share or distribute 100% points over these 4 reasons. And so now we have in each of these collected columns is like the reasons, and then the 3 little columns in the 3 shades of gray are the 3 practitioner groups. The darkest being the non-practitioners, and the light being the advanced practitioners. And you can see a general trend here that advanced practitioners, or with the practice, there is an increase in importance for health and for environment and climate, and a decrease in importance for animal welfare and for weight control. But almost none of these differences was significant except for the environment and climate reason, which is interesting in terms of my research hypothesis of mindfulness and the connection to pro-environmental behaviors, because we could see that actually in terms of mindfulness practitioners, they are significantly more worried about the environment, and that is also a significant higher part in their motivation to reduce meat consumption. And then remember the motivation sheet in the beginning and our little poll. So here we have the 6 motivation types and comparing the 3 groups along those motivations. And only on the level of integrated motivation, we found a significant difference between non-practitioners and advanced practitioners. And we also found a significant difference on the level of A motivation, which was the I don't know why I'm actually doing it. So people basically do it without not being so aware of their internal motivations. So I was very happy to find this, because this was my hypothesis of even starting this research and using this scale for motivation towards the environment, which has not been used very much yet in the environmental behavior literature. And yeah, it speaks for itself. So repeating that integrated motivation is that motivation that comes from deep inside, which we have almost taken in fully with our sense of self. It has become part of ourselves to act in a certain way. And there's no external force pushing us to do that anymore. It's a completely internal and quality of motivation where our needs for autonomy, for competence, and for relationships are met. And yeah, also to say that when these higher these higher motivations are met, the behavior becomes a lot more sustainable as well and long-term. So if we think about environmental conservation, it's that kind of motivation that we want to achieve. And finally, we also did a little sequential mediation analysis to test for this pathway that we hypothesized in a model. So we used an indicator that was binary, where people could say if they, as part of their mindfulness practice, also practice compassion. And compassion practice is already a part of a little more advanced practice. So basically all the advanced practitioners said they did practice compassion, and only very few of those intermediate and non-practitioners would practice compassion. It happened that 1 or 2 non-practitioners practice compassion because they probably practice yoga, and then they would practice compassion as part of that. But our meditators group, we only classified them by looking into their meditation practice. So sitting still, eyes closed, and meditating. So not the yoga. The yoga was not part of this group separation. So we looked at the effect from compassion practice onto greenhouse gas emissions. And in general, I have to say it up front, the R square was very small, 0.08, which means that only 8% of this greenhouse gas emission reduction can be, is explained by the variability. 8% of the variability in the greenhouse gas emission is influenced by the compassion practice, which is not very much. It just means that there are a lot of other factors in play, but there is a certain impact of this practice on greenhouse gas emissions. And we were looking for, is there a pathway through connectedness with nature that would then increase the integrated motivation, which, if you remember, the green pathway was kind of saying that when people are connected with nature, empathy and compassion happen, and then the integrated motivation will be stronger. And we found that about half of this relationship between compassion practice and greenhouse gas emission was actually mediated by these two factors. And yeah, with this final slide, I want to or say my very great thank you to Bill and Ans for their support. Bill, particularly for the theoretical piece of work that we published together, and Ans, who was very, very helpful and important in the discussion for the survey work and the statistical processes. And I cannot say that this was all my own work. It was greatly supported by my supervisor and advisor that I'm very grateful to.
Thanks very much, Ute. Questions? I think that's a nice little exercise at the beginning as well. I think really good to get people just to do that sort of reflection, because we often don't, even those of us who are doing all of this environmental stuff all the time, often don't really reflect on exactly why we're doing this. So some really interesting results coming out of this, and I'm sure Ute's very happy to take some questions. So if you just want to flag your hand if you've got a question, or post it into the, sorry, that's me pressing the wrong thing. Please come forward.
All right. So now where can I see who lifted? Oh, Mark.
Yeah, if you click on participants, you can see where the flags are. So Mark's the first one.
I'm just motivating people to get asking. That's all. I'm not passionate about this question first. Okay. Otherwise, people are too quiet. You did the exercise at the start. Have you done a test to see whether doing that exercise influences people's responses to those questions?
Oh, well, I did that with you. I did not do that as part of my. Yeah, but I wanted to influence people. Like I think what happens is that it's like you.
There's no implied criticism. I was just really advancing my question.
Yeah, no, I find it's a very interesting question, and it is very important actually for the understanding of this higher type of motivation, because it has to do more with insight and introspection. Because if you are doing some very important, if you do paperwork and you're very busy, and someone says, "How much do you love your wife?" then you're going to be like, very much, or whatever. But it is different to be in a moment where you have a glass of wine with her and you have a great conversation. You're like, oh, I really love this woman, you know. It's like, it's a complete different setting. So I wanted to be enabling people to not just be cognitively thinking about why do I do things for the environment, but have this felt sense of why people do things for the environment, which is almost necessary to be able to connect to this deeper sense.
No, I got the motivation even as you did it. That was all fine. I was just wondering whether you use this in your experimental protocol, or whether you did a test or not. I was just interested. So thank you.
That came up because I thought it would be nice to do it in the presentation.
Tilly has flagged actually in the chat that, of course, we did do that with insect eating, because we did a mindfulness experiment first, experiment, which we did with the MSc students.
And did it have an effect?
Yeah. Ute, do you want to describe the effect?
Yeah, we did it with a group of 90 people because not so many came there, which was a very small group, so it was harder to detect the differences. So there was a tendency that we had one group that did mindfulness practice and the other group watched a statistics video. And the people who watched statistics video were less interested in trying the insects. But it was like, I don't know, Ans, maybe you remember, but like the difference was not big enough to be significant, basically.
Yeah. Ans has got her hand up as well.
Yeah, I had my hand raised. I was like, oh, I remember this. No, you're right. It was a teeny tiny difference, but it was really difficult to sort of control. But I was thinking, Uta, because you might speak to your other study that you were doing with the mindfulness intervention. I think maybe Mark was alluding to.
All right, but well, yeah, I mean, those things didn't pop up in my head because I thought he was referring to this nature imagination and bottle picking thing,
Yes.
which is the first time I ever did that. But yeah, the second piece of my research is going to be, first of all, I interviewed 20 people that took the survey, and I'm looking into the qualitative motivations. And then the next piece is that I worked with a company who started mindfulness training with their employees, and I have measured them before, after, and 3 months after their mindfulness intervention. And I have not analyzed the data yet, so I cannot say anything about it. But I have interviewed people, and there are first signs of an establishment of this connection with nature. People taking in the environment again, realizing that there are birds out there and that it is a positive effect on them. But I'm not able to comment on any results from that. I'll be in touch with you, Ans.
There's a question in the chat from.
I cannot see the hands with the name.
Claire. There's a question in the chat from Claire.
Okay, Claire.
Claire, do you want to ask the question?
Okay, well, what it says is, I know you didn't say so, but it seems your thesis seems to suggest that meditation mindfulness leads to greenhouse gas emission reductions, or possibly vice versa. But have you looked as well at what they might actually correspond to, in the same way that you can correlate drowning with ice cream consumption levels? But that's because they both happen in summer when it's hot, so people swim more. So the fact that they appear to be correlated may not be quite as connected as it initially sort of might seem.
Yeah, so it's important that you raise that question, because I think that is a very common thinking step that we take when we see graphics like this one. But in our analysis, we have not looked into correlation. Only the last bit on sequential mediation has used multiple regression to do the sequential mediation analysis, but it's also a different process. But here what we have done is group comparison. So it is basically ANOVAs or Mankovas and this kind of style of techniques where we do not at all look at causality and if mindfulness is like correlated with the outcome variable of pro-environmental behavior. Here is really just looking at the status quo. What about those people? What do they eat? And what is it less impactful? I'm not saying that I have never looked into if the mindfulness practice is the reason for the reduction, but there is something about these people, and maybe something worth studying, why those people are more motivated to or more concerned about the environment, and why those people are eating less meat and less animal products. And that is like what I'm asking them in my interview follow-up. This is just to take the picture. So Claire, it is not saying anything about this connection between between the two.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure. Are there more questions? Bill, you can see the hands. I can't. Is there any more?
I'm looking out for any hands. So any questions for anyone? It's just picking up on the point that you mentioned there, was that actually the follow-up, which is actually the qualitative stuff, you're going to be you're analysing now interviews that you undertook. So
yeah.
So yeah, there's Sarah's just asking the chat, jumping on that. How would you investigate this further to establish a potential causation? And something from Yanis.
Okay, we'll do that first, and then Yanis' question.
Yeah.
So, well, causation is a very difficult one, because that is a little bit what I have tried in my the second piece of the research with the intervention of having people who have never practiced mindfulness to take an 8 weeks training and like take them over the time of 6 months and observe if they have then significant changes in their environmental. Like I also measured the animal protein consumption and like the factors of nature connectedness and motivation towards the environment. So the only way to establish causality is a randomized control trial, which costs money, is difficult to do. And in my case, for example, many people have first signed up for the intervention and then they didn't go, they didn't do the homework, they didn't engage at the same level with the exercise. So it's very hard to establish causality in this medical way. So what Bill and I then focus on is the qualitative research, which is also hard to establish causality in a positivist way. But I'm basically asking people stepwise, how do they eat and how do they feel about the environment? And then I start to ask them the connection between those that practice. So how has your life changed when you started to practice? And then they will tell me things. And then I say, has it impacted your food consumption, do you think? So I basically ask people, is there a causal link between your motivation and mindfulness? And I have to say, surprisingly, that most of them confirm this. And most of them say, well, I already was aware of the environment and it was kind of important to me, but the practice has made it so much stronger. So there's the two cases. One person, a few people say, I didn't care at all. I did never think about the environment. It didn't occur to me. And about 5 years into the practice, I started to feel this connection. And then I started caring. And other people who said, yeah, there was like the seed of interest, or seed of concern, but I was not as deeply committed to doing my part in doing things for the environment.
Yanis has got his hand up, and then we've got a question from Mira then afterwards. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Uta, for this. My first question is, I'm sorry, but I missed the 3 slides towards the end of your presentation. I wanted to ask if you had a regression model in there, because I saw the coefficients in the end, but I missed the model, I suppose, earlier. So if you could show this again, that I would be grateful. And the other thing, just an observation on the last point you made on the establishing causation aspect. Well, I mean, in fact, what you would need would be some plausibly exogenous source of random variation in your analysis if you wanted to establish causation with observational data. Possibly in your specific case, that would be quite hard because it's very hard to find actually data with sample sizes large enough and specific enough to establish exactly what you want. But doing a randomized control trial is not the only way that one can do this in general. So yeah, just that. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Dennis. Your comment just showed how complicated and probably costly it is to do a proper causality analysis in the way that positivistic science would expect. And about your comment with the, let me go to that slide that you were referring to. I guess it's this one, the sequential mediation analysis.
Yes, that's the one. Could you explain how this was produced? Is there a regression model in the background?
Yeah, so for all my analysis, I use the SPSS software, and there's one researcher, he's called Hayes, and he has made a process, his model, like a software add-on that's called Process Tool. And this Process Tool is what I used for this analysis, and it basically does multiple regressions with each of those factors, and then it gives you those mediation indicators, parameters. So when you look at, I don't know if you can see my mouse going over the presentation. I don't think so, right? No. Okay. So if you look at those in the graphic where the arrows are, so the A1, A2, B1, B2, D21 are the regression factors that the model gave me. And it is the unstandardized value. And then the parameter estimates of mediation that are in the list below, those are the mediation values. So they would determine the strength of the mediation here. And basically the system gives me a print of all the regressions that it does. But I will not put this print on a slide, you know what I mean? So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, thank you very much for this.
It also gives the confidence intervals for to see if the sequential mediation is significant. That's all on the sheet, and that you can see with the stars. So, for example, compassion practice does not directly improve or is not directly related to integrated motivation. This was not a significant pathway. That's why I have the line, a dotted line. But then compassion practice on connectedness with nature did have a triple star, so it was highly significant. Now Mark is gonna
just one final comment on this. I don't know exactly what the process does, but one thing that you might want to look at is how you get your standard errors, and maybe you want to adjust for heteroskedasticity using robust standard errors. And the tendency when this happens, when you do that, is for stars to disappear, which is deeply disappointing, but it's it's good practice. So perhaps check on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janice. There's a question from Mira, I think, or is Mark's question to follow up on that?
Mine is to follow up, but I think Mira's is more important.
Okay, let's have. So Mira's asks basically in the chat, how can we use the findings from this work to drive better environmental decision making at individual and institutional level?
Yeah. So because we don't have causality, I cannot say we should teach everybody mindfulness and the world will be a better place. But what we suggested in our paper that we published in Ecological Economics is that we might have to increase the amount of experiential strategies to improve people's behavior. So because we saw that in the last 20 years, education, environmental education has not always been very successful, because the calculation that, we give people information, then they will change their behavior, does not help. So the idea is, what I would say is that our environmental education needs to be more experiential. We need to invest in this relationship, especially now with urbanization and people being more and more distanced from the environment and from nature. I think it is more and more important that our formal education gives people experiential insights in their relationship with nature. But also, if you look at mindfulness, you don't necessarily have a direct link to nature in your mindfulness practice, but it improves connection in general to other people and connectedness with yourself, which are all part of like the same. Yeah. Bill?
Yeah, Mark, did you want to pick up on your question?
Yeah, only if no one else has a question, because I know the time's short.
Yeah,
does anyone else have?
We'll wrap up in a few minutes, but go for it, Mark.
Okay. Just little things I'd like, with regard to reporting the results of these kinds of analyses. It's important not to presume that if there's no star, that there's no effect. And you actually use those words. There is no influence of B1, I think, or A2, because there was no star. You've only failed to find an effect, and you can only say there is no effect if you specify what the effect size is that matters, and you've got a sample size sufficient to detect it if it's present. So to say that there is no effect is strictly not correct. You've really, all you can say is, I have found no effect of that.
Yeah.
I know it's a subtle, but it's a very important distinction, because people will go away and say, "Oh, there is no effective A," because Uta told me, and she's got a paper and it's got this really sophisticated analysis. There is no effective A, but you haven't proven that. All you've proven is fail to detect an effective A. That's all. I think it's a really important distinction, and I like our department not to make that mistake. I think every other department on the planet makes it, and I'd like us to be better. That was all.
Thank you. Super important. Thank you.
Any more questions from anyone? Just otherwise we'll begin to wrap up, I think. Uta, thanks very much indeed for a great presentation and some really interesting sort of questions and discussion there. I know, actually, interestingly, from my own perspective, having grown up in the countryside and in contact with nature, my connectedness with nature and my interest in the environment came much earlier than ever my interest in mindfulness. So I think my mindfulness has come much later, but I think that connectedness there certainly with nature certainly seems to be quite a relevant component there. Uta, any final comments?
Yes, exactly. I just thought that for me the same applies. I also grew up in nature and with very nature aware parents, and I would be a counterexample of this causality, but I don't think that we can use this epistemological mindset that has come with positivist science for a long time, just because it is not timely or periodically related, and this is first and this is second. They can still be causally related, because when we practice mindfulness, we just build up all kinds of connections that we haven't had before, or we strengthen certain connections. So I think that the future of this research in this field will also be to search for new ways of even looking for causality, of doing science, of asking questions and accepting answers that are not purely quantitative in the sense that we are used to it.
And of course, it's perfectly possible that causality could act in both directions, that it could be that connectedness with nature actually encourages people to be more mindful, and being more mindful may encourage more connectedness with nature. So there doesn't have to be just a one-way street. If we
almost like, there's this space in our life that sometimes is not filled, and it needs to be filled maybe. And that is that space that gives us meaning. And we can find different ways to feeling it. And some people might look for doing music or other ways of feeling this connection. And so this is
brilliant.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for your interest and for coming.
Thanks, everyone, and see you around at the next.
Thank you, Uta.
Seminar.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Enjoy.